You heard it here first, folks. Save your native ecosystem and put a cane toad in your pocket today. Hey, what is up, you guys? You're watching Tatiana's Tiny Zoo. I'm Tatiana, and today we're going to be learning all about one of the most infamous amphibians, the cane toad. Do you want a cane toad as a pet? This video will let you know everything you need to know before getting one. Cane toads, also known as marine toads or giant neotropical toads, are large terrestrial amphibians native to South and Central America. Unfortunately, throughout the 1800s and early 1900s, these toads were taken from their native ecosystems and introduced around the world as part of a pest control strategy for the sugarcane industry. Ultimately, these frogs were not a good predator for the particular pests plaguing the sugarcane farms, and the toads quickly became an invasive species around the world. Females can lay over 20,000 eggs at one time, and their populations get out of control very quickly. These guys are a nuisance animal throughout Australia and here in the US as well. That's why this is one of the only animals that I don't really mind and actually encourage people to take out of the wild and keep as pets. You heard it here first, folks. Save your native ecosystem and put a cane toad in your pocket today. Just a friendly reminder, if you do decide to take a toad out of the wild, make sure to get it checked out by your local exotics veterinarian. Wild animals can carry parasites and diseases. Anyways, let's talk about cane toads and how you can keep one successfully at home. Before deciding if a cane toad is the right pet for you, please be aware that these animals can easily live 15 years or more, with one of the oldest individuals getting up to 33 years old. Like most reptiles and amphibians, this animal is a commitment and requires regular care. If you can't care for your froggy friend anymore, research reptile and amphibian rescues in your local areas, and please, for the love of God, do not release unwanted pets into the wild. I am begging you. Marine toads are considered the largest toad species in the world, so expect your froggy friend to reach an impressive size. Males can commonly be palm-sized, while females, which are always larger than males, can get up to 10 inches long. However, the huge-sized toads you see online are usually Suriname cane toads. You can expect your average marine toad to be several inches long and about palm-sized. Like you might have guessed, the most daunting thing about these toads is their overall size. Because they're so big, you can expect your toad to need a pretty large enclosure. I currently have my young toad in a 24 by 24 by 18 inch enclosure, but if it turns out to be a female, I will likely have to give it more space eventually. They are incredibly active amphibians, so your toad will appreciate any and all space you can give him. Cane toads are solitary animals, and they are known to be cannibalistic as tadpoles and even young toadlets. Even as adults, these toads can easily eat anything they can fit into their mouths, so it's best to only house one toad per enclosure. There's a wide variety of enclosures you can get for your toad, including reptile or fish aquariums, plastic sterilite tubs, zen habitats, or other some assembly required enclosures. Just make sure your enclosure has a secure lid and plenty of ventilation. Now let's talk about temps and lighting. Cane toads, like all amphibians, are cold-blooded, which means they rely on the temperature of their environment to regulate their own body temperature. Unlike reptiles, amphibians don't really bask in the same way, so you will need an accurate ambient temperature instead of a super hot basking area. I recommend having a warm side and a cool side to your enclosure, with the warmest areas being between 78 and 82 degrees. The rest of the enclosure can easily sit around room temperature between 70 and 74 degrees. A nighttime drop in temperature is also normal and beneficial to your cold-blooded friends. Just make sure that the enclosure doesn't drop below 68 degrees. These ranges in temperature allow your amphibian to self-regulate and move around the enclosure if it's feeling too warm or too cold. Make sure the temperatures are checked regularly or monitor them using a thermostat probe to ensure there are no fluctuations. It's very easy for amphibians to overheat, and they can die very quickly at high temperatures, so it's vital to check your enclosure temps often. To achieve the desired temperature, you can use various heat elements like heat lamps, deep heat projectors, or other lights. If you have live plants in your enclosure, I find that plant LED lights can be enough to warm your enclosure to the correct levels. The only heating element I wouldn't really recommend are heat mats. This is because toads burrow underground for shelter and to escape hot temperatures. If you are providing heat from below, the toad could easily overheat or even burn itself while sitting inside its burrow. Despite being a nocturnal animal, I would still recommend using a UVB bulb in your cane toad enclosures. That is because you can sometimes catch toads cryptic basking or moving from one burrow to another, and proper UVB absorption is vital for their growth and well-being. Personally, I would recommend the Arcadia Shade Dweller as it has been specifically designed for forest-dwelling reptiles and amphibians. Make sure the UV light is fitted correctly and the marine toad is not able to get too close. Keep in mind that these UVB bulbs need to be replaced every year to ensure proper light output. Another brand I highly recommend is VivTech, a Wisconsin-based company who produces quality UVB bulbs that only need to be replaced every 4 years. Finally, let's talk about humidity. I try to keep my cane toad around 60% humidity and even as high as 80%. These are very, very hardy toads. That's part of the reason they're so invasive, so they can withstand a very broad range of temperature and humidity. But I find that most sources say that 60 to 80% is the sweet spot. Having a large water dish is one way to raise the humidity in your enclosure, as well as regular misting and having a deep substrate layer. Speaking of water, having a large water dish is actually vital to your toad's well-being. Toads don't really drink water, but they love to soak in it. I catch my toad soaking in his water bowl pretty much every night, so having access to fresh water is really important. I recommend using dechlorinated tap water instead of any distilled or bottled water. What I do is keep a special jug of tap water out at all times and let the chlorine evaporate for about 24 hours before using it. You can also use Repti-safe water treatments to be able to use the water right away instead of having to wait. Okay, now let's talk more about what goes inside your enclosure, besides a water dish, of course. In my opinion, this is not a species that can be kept on paper towels or in a sterile enclosure. Living underground and burrowing are all natural behaviors for cane toads, so providing a deep substrate layer is a great way to encourage this. There are a lot of substrate options out there, and you can pick a pre-made mix like Repti-soil and just use that, or you can make your own mix. I find that using a blend of Repti-soil, eco-earth, sand, and sphagnum moss really allow the substrate to hold its shape and let the frog create extensive burrow tunnels. If we're being completely honest, I also highly recommend keeping this species in a bioactive enclosure. It's not required by any means, but the cleanup crew will help reduce waste in your enclosure, and the plants keep the humidity levels high. I won't go into the specific details of building your own bioactive enclosure, but if you are interested in more details about how I built this bioactive tank, I'll include a link for that video down below. Bioactive or not, you are going to have to provide your toad with plenty of hiding opportunities. Cork, driftwood, and even ceramic reptile hides are great to have throughout your enclosure. Always have a hide on the warm side and on the cool side of your tank to allow your toad to regulate his own temperature. Live and fake plants are good at providing even more cover for your toad and making it feel comfortable and safe in its new home. No matter how many hides you provide, your toad will eventually make its own burrows throughout the enclosure and probably prefer those to the hides you included, but it's always good to have them either way. The diet for cane toads is usually pretty easy, especially if you already have other reptiles and amphibians. While they can and will eat anything that they can fit into their mouths, in the wild, these guys eat almost exclusively insects, with multiple studies showing their stomach contents full of millipedes, beetles, ants, and pill bugs. For this reason, you should give your toad a wide variety of feeder insects that can range from dubia roaches, crickets, mealworms, hornworms, and even night crawlers. I've seen some people feeding their cane toads pinky mice and even crazy stuff like wet cat food, but these are generally very fatty and can lead to obesity in your amphibians. And like I said earlier, there are plenty of studies that look at cane toad stomach contents, so if you're curious about what they eat in the wild, I'd definitely consider looking those up. Personally, I am sticking to an insect-only diet. I also highly recommend supplementing your toads with good calcium and multivitamin supplements. I only feed my toad about 2 times a week, sometimes only once. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, and to be honest, compared to some other recommendations I've seen, it's going to sound like underfeeding. But obesity is a huge problem in the reptile and amphibian keeping worlds, and these animals can develop many weight-related problems, such as fatty liver disease, tumors, and more. So for that reason, I would much rather slightly underfeed than slightly overfeed. If you notice your animal losing weight, then you can always up your feeding schedule to 3 times a week instead of 2. Let's talk about handling and temperament. One important thing to note is that marine toads have poison glands that can excrete bufotoxins when they are stressed. While this isn't too dangerous to humans, it can be highly toxic and even fatal to dogs and cats, so please be very careful when handling your pet toad, especially if you have young children or other pets. Considering that toads and other amphibians can also absorb things through their skin like toxins, oil, salt, and chemicals, I don't really recommend handling them frequently. In fact, I only handle my toad when we go out to an educational program, and even then I put him in his transport tub and I don't take him out until we get back home. Cane toads can be relatively shy when they are young, but as they grow bigger, they will stop being scared of you and can actually become quite brave in their habitats. Despite being a hands-off type animal, you can get a lot of joy and amusement by watching these guys in their enclosures and by feeding them. Now, to close this video out, I will say I highly recommend doing plenty of research before getting your pet cane toad, or any animal for that matter. Go out and look at multiple sources, watch other videos besides this one, do as much reading as you can before you decide to keep one as a pet. That is really the best way to set yourself up for success when keeping any exotic animal. But yeah, that's really all I have for you today. If you watched all the way to the end, you are incredible, and I want to thank you for supporting my channel. If you want to know the products I used in this video, all the links are in the description below. And finally, if you want more animal content, consider following me on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, or Patreon. Woo, that was a lot of talking. Okay, I'm done now. I'll see you in next week's video.